People always talk about getting the proper exposure. And one of the ways to confirm visually if you are in fact getting the proper exposure is to check the histogram on the camera. Okay? So proper exposure. Basically means that what? That your exposure is in the middle, right? Before you take your shot, you have to verify and confirm that your exposure is in the middle, right? Of course, that is if you're shooting ambient, not with a flash. Everything we talk about in this class usually talks about ambient lighting, correct? So, in order to confirm or at least to double check if you are getting your proper exposure is to kind of take a peek at your histogram. And the way you do that is you're gonna go to your actual photo that you just took, and then you're gonna toggle over to the histogram part. What you're gonna see is you're gonna see a little square box, kind of like this, correct? And this is gonna measure the blacks and the whites and your exposure. What you wanna see, if you're properly exposed and taking the proper pictures, you're gonna see something that looks like a little mountain, like this. Something like that. Or even, it could be a big peak or whatever, but what you want to see is you want to see both sides, whites and blacks, touching on both corners. If in fact they are touching, you are taking the proper photograph, you are properly exposed. If your whites or your blacks are clipped, if you see that one is not reaching on either side, then you're probably either over or underexposed. Also, if you see the line either up here or up here go straight up on the side, you are definitely clipping your image. Okay, it means you're losing resolution. We're gonna watch a video on that. Hopefully that'll explain a little bit, and then let's watch that video, and then we'll get back to it, and then we'll further explain it. A very short explanation of how to utilize a histogram. Basically, you want the information to be up in the middle. You see how the thing is where you want everything else. You got your blacks and you got your whites. Now, when I'm doing editing in my images after I do a photo, the first thing I look at is the histogram within my editing software. What I'm looking for is what they call the levels, and that what you see can be adjusted in your levels. And that is the very first thing that I adjust when I'm editing. And I will do a photo on here so you can see what I'm talking about when I bring it in. The very first thing I do before I start editing, my editing process is to adjust the levels. And that means I'm adjusting the histogram within the image to make sure that it's not gonna be over or underexposed. Like he was talking about, when you start putting your image, your histogram over the right, to the white sides, and you start seeing the clipping, you're actually losing resolution. You're losing basically quality of the image by doing that. The image becomes overblown, and hence you get that overexposed look. The other way, if you clip the blacks, it'll be the opposite. You'll get the, if you get on this side, and you start seeing the thing go up, now you're losing quality of the image by clipping your blacks, and your image will become darker. It will become overexposed. You understand that part?
So the peak should be in the middle?
So you want to see most of the information in the middle. That's where your blacks are going to be in the middle anyway, most of your resolution. Now, remember, it all has to do with what you're focusing on as well, okay? It doesn't necessarily mean that it's right or it's wrong. It's just kind of giving you an idea about what your image is. I use that in the studio, because in the studio I'm in a controlled environment, and I want to make sure that everything is properly done. But you yourself may want to either under or overexpose the shot to achieve the look that you want to achieve, okay? It's totally up to you. So one of the hardest things for learning photographers who are just coming up is understanding the histogram. I know I had a hard time with it, and I still confuse me once in a while, but I just kind of I had learned to look at it just sufficiently enough to tell me, yeah, I'm okay. Or no, I'm a little bit over to the right, I'm a little bit over to the left. I need to either adjust either maybe a little bit less ISO, a little bit more ISO, whatever, just to bring up that image, just to even it out. Too much black or too much white. The camera's seeing what it's seeing, and it's up to you to adjust that to get the histogram somewhere in the middle, okay?
And the only way to do your histogram is after you take the picture.
Yes,
not when you're.
I'll show you right now. In fact, if you want to take, we can get, you have your camera, right? If we can get her to take a photo, and we'll look at it, and we'll show you how to do that. Okay, just remember, like you, in answer to your question, if it's gonna be overexposed, it's gonna be to the right. That's where your whites are. If it's gonna be underexposed, it's gonna be to your left, which is where your blacks are, okay? You want it to be somewhere in the middle. Okay, you don't want to see any clipping on either side, okay? So that's what you want to look for. Now, if your histogram is pretty decently in the middle, then there's no reason to do any changes. Maybe you can just correct it in your software when you're doing your editing, okay? And now when I get into the editing, I want to go ahead and take an image so that we can go over the computer and kind of just show you how to adjust the levels. And if nothing else that you do on your image, those are the two main things. The two main things is to do your levels, which is your histogram portion of your image, make sure that it's properly exposed. And then you're at the end of your, whatever editing that you do, the very last thing we talked about in the past is to do your what? Your sharpening, right? You always save sharpening for last. Never sharpen your image until you are absolutely sure you are done editing.
So what are the steps then? First, you
Well,
open the file and.
yeah, I'm gonna go through it. I'm gonna bring up my software, then we'll go over it. Okay? So any questions on the histogram? It's very basic. I just kind of went over it, very basic. There's a little bit more to it, more technicalities to it, but I'm just gonna make sure that you realize that your whites and your blacks should be where they're supposed to be, okay? Now, if your image is very, very white or very, very black to begin with, you're gonna have some issues, okay? Because the camera is either seeing too much light or not enough light. Just remember that. But the main thing is that you want to be properly exposed.
Even in the nighttime.
Well, that's a different thing, because we talk about night shooting and all that. But yeah, your histogram should always be about the same when it comes to the final image.
And then those color palettes, can you adjust those as well?
Well, it's all part of the same histogram. Okay, that's just what they call your RGB, your red, greens, and blacks, or blue, RGBs, red, green, and whatever. Anyway, yeah. So that also comes into play, but that has to do with your color palette. Is how you have your color set to the camera. But you're really more interested in when it comes to the histogram is to confirm or verify your exposure by looking at your peaks and valleys.
So you can set your colors.
Yes, you can. There are different ways of shooting. And that just really has to do with how you're going to edit afterwards. What kind of program you're going to edit in. You're going to do Adobe RGB, or there's all kinds of different ways that you want to. Like for example, if you edit in Lightroom, which is the one that most people do now, either Adobe well, they're both Adobe, but it's either Photoshop or Lightroom. Some people like to edit in the different color palette. And I will go through them too. There's several of them. There's tons of them.
I did see red.
Right, and some of them are just the most common ones that everybody uses, but if you just leave it alone, it's gonna default to whatever the camera is set at, okay? Now, if you're shooting in RAW, you can change that later when you're editing part. Before you go into your editing, when you first open up your RAW image, you can change your color palette on there as well. But that's editing, that's software. We're talking about just a histogram today. Okay, so we're gonna look at some of Clara's images. She just started shooting with the new 50mm lens, and hopefully, right now we're talking about histograms, so we wanna kind of make sure that the images were properly exposed. But before we do that, we're gonna kind of look through the images, just to see what we have. We have some that are outdoors, and some that are indoors, correct? So, the 50mm, and let's kind of see what the properties are on this, because I wanna see where, sorry. I want to see what you were shooting with. shooting, at 6:3 on 400 ISO. Are you shooting in, what kind of motor are you shooting in? Do you know? Automotive or what?
Aperture priority.
Aperture priority, you said that's 2.3?
Yeah.
Okay, that's gonna, so you're shooting all your images in aperture priority then?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and open them up. Let's take a look at them. What's that?
She's my hero.
Yeah, that's actually good. Okay, so this looks pretty good. I wanna see. Nice colors, everything looks good. Did you say you had your white balance set or what? Just on?
No, like the white balance? No, something like camera, like I was shooting a picture and then I noticed that my white balance was off by like 3. Cause sometimes that happens. I don't know why.
Just your camera.
Yeah.
What do you have set at then?
Like the white balance?
Yeah.
Oh, 0. Oh, what are you talking about?
Well, I mean, daylight or?
Daylight.
Daylight, okay.
Daylight.
Outdoor, you're outdoors in daylight.
I put
Oh,
it
what?
in auto.
Okay, auto, okay.
Auto.
All right, that's what I want to know. You did a pretty good job. Cute baby. Very, very, photogenic.
Those were inside.
This is inside?
Yeah.
Now, did you open up your aperture here at 2.8?
Yeah, that was like open.
So you were talking about 2.8 and about 800 ISO indoors? Because that lens does a pretty good job, I can tell. That's actually a very nice image. I would put this image on Flickr. It's a good image. And here, it looks like you did land your focal point on the face, huh?
Yeah, well, I was trying to aim
You
for
see
the
how
face.
Do you see how it drops? The depth of field kind of drops and it becomes a little softer as you go towards the feet. But the face is pretty sharp.
So there's, yeah, that's what I was gonna talk to you about, cause like there's a picture that he looks good, his face,
Uh-huh.
but then his hand, he was moving his hand, so then you.
That's
could-
because, yeah, that has to do with your shutter speed being low. If he's moving his hands and they're coming fuzzy, that's because your shutter speed's too low. It's not freezing the action.
Oh.
So the way you want to correct that is you want to up your ISO to give you a little more shutter speed. Okay, that's how you will correct that.
Then there's a lot of white.
Yeah, cause the sheet.
Yeah.
And then
This
he
is
was
what we're
wearing-
talking about, and I want to bring that up. This would be a good example to try the histogram on, because if it's seeing, it's probably clipping the whites. You're seeing a lot of white, and it's clipping the image, like right here. This one,
Oh, yeah, the background.
I don't know where you put your focal point on this one.
I don't
On the
know.
nose, it looks like. You hit the nose. That is the thing about shooting wide open, is you have to be very careful where you land your focal point, because a very small part of the image, now, especially if you're really close. Were you very close to him?
Yeah, my space was like
Right.
literally like.
So the
this
closer you
I'll
get,
show it to
the
you.
more depth of field you're gonna get. Because the less of the image is gonna be in focus, so that's why you have to be very careful. So what you wanna do here, is you kinda wanna try to go for that eye right there, for your focal point. Okay, the one eye that you can see. But it looks good though, I mean, it's, a lot of times, when it comes to babies, these images of, shallow depth of field look really good with a lot of bokeh on them, they actually look the best. Most baby photographers that you see, that's how they shoot. They're always shooting wide open with a lot of depth of field and a very, very shallow image. So yeah, it looks good. It's crooked.
Yeah, I pop him with a pillow so he could be like change the.
Okay, first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open up my Photoshop and I'm gonna bring up, the first of those two images that I just imported into my pictures folder. So, let me go ahead and, bring it in. And the first number of that was what? Oh, here it is, here, I got it, 121. Okay, so the first thing I wanna look at here, okay, is I'm gonna look at the levels, okay, because the first thing I wanna look at is I wanna look at the histogram. Now, you look at my histogram, you see the way it is right here? Actually, it's your histogram, it's your picture. It looks pretty good. That was the one photo you took outdoors, right?
Mhm.
So, we have to do is just a little bit here, I don't know if you can tell, just a little bit, it's not quite touching. You see that? Maybe a little bit on that side. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do a very subtle adjustment to my histogram, this is called the levels, okay? So this picture, what it's telling me by looking at this, it's telling me that it's pretty well exposed. You took it right in camera, and that's the goal. The goal is to try to get your pictures in camera right off the bat. Saves you less time or more time when you're trying to work on it down the road, okay? So it looks like a pretty good histogram. So I'm just gonna adjust. So you grab, I can see this on this side on the left, on the black, it's just a little bit off, and I'm just gonna bring it in just very little, okay? And then on the whites, I don't know if you can tell, it's not quite touching the corner, can you tell? On the right side? It's almost there, but it's not quite. So I'm just gonna drag it just very subtly. So you can see the image, how it changes, okay? So let's say I'm gonna drag this a lot. Now it's gonna really widen, make it really white. But I don't want it, I want to drag it to right there, to where it touches there, okay? Same thing with the side. If I want to drag it too much, look what happens, see? So I want to just drag it enough to where it's properly exposed and it's showing the right there. Now, once we do that, and once we realize that the image is properly where it's supposed to be, then you can take a look at the image, and if it looks too dark or too light still to you, then you grab the middle one. And the middle one, it should be at 1.00, as you can see, that's your default setting. But if you bring it in either this way, make it darker, or this way to make it lighter. It's totally up to you, it's personal taste. Sometimes I'll adjust an image and see, oh, it's still pretty, it's not quite where I want it, okay? In this case, I think it is, so we're gonna leave it alone where it was. But just to show you, the middle one it's gonna drag the whites and the blacks to make the image what you want it to be, okay? In this case, we're gonna leave it alone. I'm gonna put it back to where it was because it was perfectly exposed, okay? So once I'm happy with that,
Can you darken the colors too at this point?
yes, the colors, yeah, you can. But I think it's a properly exposed image right here. You don't really have to do any more work. Again, personal preference. You know, it's what looks good to you or to your client. Sometimes, you know, you want an image. But right there, this image, to me, or at least what the camera is telling me, is that it was taken properly. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and just tell it yes. Okay?
And you're in Lightspeed or Photo?
I'm in Photoshop right now. The other one's called Lightroom. And you can do pretty much everything on either one. I have my little workflow's a little different. I do all my initial editing in Lightroom, in Photoshop, and then I will import my images at the end once I'm done editing into Lightroom, and I just add my logo or whatever, or my my last minute things. But I don't really do too much with that. Again, you can do the entire thing in Lightroom, which a lot of people do. That's just how I do it. I'll do 2 or 3 edits here, and then I'll go into Lightroom and finish it up there. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna do what I normally do. Now I want you to see the image between the original and then the end, okay? And you're gonna see how much nicer. So I've already confirmed and adjusted my levels to show that my histogram is where it should be, right? Now, what I'm gonna do here doesn't necessarily mean it's what you're gonna do. That's just my workflow. Some people go a lot more into it, some people don't, okay? Eventually you'll develop, now some people do curves. This is your curves, okay? And what they do by doing that is they do a little, and I don't really, I mean, you can do this, you just use the auto if you want, which I don't really use. The image now is gonna be ready, okay? So you'll see here 12 inches on the long end, which gives you a 12 by 8, correct? 12 by 8. So you always want to resize it on the long end, and then it'll give you the short end automatically. And then you want to make sure, because it is going to be for print, that you have it at 300 pixels, 300 dot range, okay? So always for print, 300 dpi. Any professional magazine or studio it's gonna require your images to be at 300 dots per inch for print.
So in that table you put 300.
Yes, I showed you that, but I guess you didn't see it. Okay, so now that I'm happy with the image, I wanna do the very last thing that I wanna do, right, which is gonna be, I'm gonna sharpen it, right? Now, there are various ways of sharpening an image. I like to use, what they call, on-sharp mask. You can sharpen the edges, sharpen them or more, or even smart sharpen, but I happen to like on-sharp mask, which I happen to think is the best. So when I bring this up, you'll notice that I have it set at 85% amount. One thing that's very important is you want to make sure that your radius is set at 1.0, because that makes the entire image properly sharpened, okay, all the way around. So I set it at 1.0 radius, and I set my amount of sharpening at 85%. Now, it's totally, you can go all the way to 150%, okay, which is going to be kind of over sharpened, but I like it at 85%. Okay? So now that I'm happy, I'm going to go hit OK, and then last thing I want to do is I want to save the image. So now the image, when we bring it up, it's going to look very nice, I hope. Right? So now we close out the program. The only other thing that I would do if I was going to use this for commercial use or for my media or whatever, I would just add my logo to it. Okay? So now we're going to go ahead and bring up my pictures.
So you look like you could add on Photoshop, or you have to go to, like,
So this is the final image. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the original one. I should have made a copy because I worked over the original one. And normally, I do make copies. I never work on the originals because I guarantee if you were to compare this image to the original one, you will see a very big difference. It's a lot sharper. It's a lot nicer. All right. So with that note, we're gonna say goodnight for today. And what's our next class? I know
8 probably.
the 8th.
because next.
Yeah, it's the
Okay.
August the 8th, yeah.
If you guys don't have any questions, we'll see you on August the 8th.